72 years ago, a lie moved into a quiet American town and wore the face of a perfect husband. It shook hands, smiled politely, and never raised its voice. No one noticed it arrive. No one imagined it would stay. The town was the kind of place where mornings began slowly and nights ended early. Doors were left unlocked. Children rode bicycles until the streetlights blinked on. Everyone knew everyone, or at least believed they did. In the middle of it all lived a man who seemed to belong there more than anyone else. He smiled easily, as if kindness came naturally. He worked hard, leaving early each morning, returning home with tired hands and a calm expression. And in public, he loved his wife with visible devotion, an arm around her shoulders, a nod of respect, a gentle laugh at her jokes. It was enough to convince everyone. Trust settled around him like a second skin. On warm evenings, he sat on the porch in a wooden chair that creaked with familiarity. He waved at neighbors by name, asked about their families, commented on the weather. He looked like permanence. Inside the house, everything was in order. Dinner plates were set carefully, always aligned. Shoes rested neatly by the door, never out of place. The house didn't feel lived in so much as rehearsed. Every detail controlled, every surface calm. It was normal, almost painfully normal. Too normal. Beneath that calm surface, something pulsed quietly, something unseen. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, that didn't quite fit, when his eyes lingered too long in silence, as if he were listening to a voice no one else could hear. When his wife would stop mid-sentence, struck by a distance she couldn't name, a wall she suddenly felt but couldn't touch. Sometimes neighbors noticed how little he spoke about his past. No childhood stories. No old friends visiting from afar. Just vague answers and polite smiles. Still, no one asked questions, not the town, not his friends, not even his wife, because asking questions meant disturbing the peace, and peace in that town mattered more than truth. Years earlier, far from this quiet street, something else had happened. A moment soaked in fear. A choice made in desperation. A crime committed under a different sky. It was the kind of crime that didn't end when it was over, the kind that followed silently, waiting. It had been buried carefully, layer by layer, beneath time, distance, and a new name. So carefully that even time itself struggled to expose it. The man learned something early on. Not all lies need force. The most powerful ones are wrapped in kindness, spoken softly, repeated patiently. If you offer people comfort, they rarely look deeper. If you look like everyone else, if you act like everyone else, you disappear into the crowd. Invisibility, he learned, was power. So he became invisible. He shaped himself into what people expected to see. A reliable employee, a devoted husband, a friendly neighbor, each role performed flawlessly. His past was rewritten with half-truths and omissions, his identity polished until there were no rough edges left to question. The story he told about himself was simple, unremarkable, and safe. And that was exactly the point. At home, his wife lived inside that story. She believed it because she wanted to, because believing was easier than doubting. She noticed the way he avoided mirrors when he thought no one was watching, the way he sometimes woke in the night, breathing too fast, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for something to fall. When she asked what was wrong, he smiled and said it was nothing. Work stress, bad dreams. She accepted the answers even when they felt thin. Love has a way of filling gaps with hope. Days turned into years. Years stacked quietly on top of each other. The town aged. Children grew. Seasons changed. And through it all, the husband remained exactly the same: dependable, predictable, trusted. No one realized they were living beside a man who had mastered the art of deception so completely that it no longer felt like lying. It felt like breathing. But lies, no matter how careful, leave traces. Somewhere far from the porch and the neat shoes by the door, a detail didn't match. A record didn't align. A name surfaced where it shouldn't have. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. Just a quiet inconsistency that landed in the wrong place at the wrong time. The kind of thing most people would ignore, but someone didn't. By the time the first whisper of suspicion reached unfamiliar ears, the husband had already prepared for it without knowing. He had lived too carefully for too long. He had practiced calm until it became instinct. If anyone came looking, they would find nothing. Just a good man. Just a quiet life. Just a husband who waved from his porch and loved his wife in public. What no one realized, not yet, was that every smile was a shield, every routine a disguise, every ordinary moment another layer between him and the truth. And somewhere in the distance, a shadow was beginning to move. Soon, questions would be asked by people who didn't care about peace, people trained to notice what others missed, people who knew that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in plain sight. Soon, even the FBI would be standing at the edge of this perfect life, staring at a man everyone trusted, unsure of what they were really looking at. And the lie, so carefully built over decades, would finally feel the weight of being seen. The first crack didn't arrive with violence. It didn't come with sirens, blood, or broken doors. It arrived quietly, almost politely, in the form of a question no one expected to matter. A single line in a file that didn't line up. A name spelled two different ways. A date that didn't sit right. A record that should have existed, but didn't. Inside a federal office far from the quiet town, an investigator paused longer than he meant to. The paper lay flat on his desk, unremarkable at first glance, but something about it resisted closure. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, feeling that familiar itch crawl up his spine. The kind of doubt that doesn't shout. The kind that whispers just enough to follow you home. He checked again. Then again. The man's life, when traced backward, didn't unfold naturally. It faded. Details dissolved into gaps. Childhood records stopped abruptly. Employment histories jumped cleanly from one state to another with no overlap, no mess, no mistakes. It was too smooth, too clean. Real lives weren't built like that. Real lives left fingerprints. The investigator began pulling threads: old census documents, birth registries, military records. Each search led to the same fog. The man seemed to appear out of nowhere, fully formed, with no past behind him. No school photos, no childhood neighbors. No one who remembered him before adulthood. People exist somewhere before they become who they are. This man didn't. Back in the town, life continued as usual. The porch lights still flicked on at dusk. Neighbors still waved. The husband still smiled. But inside the house, something had shifted. His wife felt it before she understood it. She noticed the late nights that came without explanation. The way he lingered near the window after dark, listening instead of looking. How questions about his past, once brushed off gently, now sparked irritation. Sharp words, short tempers. She told herself it was stress, money, work. Men carried burdens silently, didn't they? Still, there were moments when she caught him staring at the radio as if it were speaking directly to him. Especially when FBI reports aired. Especially when names were mentioned. His body would go still. too still, as though sound itself could betray him. She began to feel like a stranger in her own home. The town, however, saw none of this, or chose not to. They spoke of him kindly. They defended him easily. When federal agents arrived with quiet questions, the answers came quickly and confidently. He was a good man, a devoted husband, always polite, never caused trouble. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, even when it was, and that became the problem. The agents weren't chasing a crime scene anymore. They weren't following blood trails or eyewitness accounts. They were chasing absence. The lack of proof, the spaces where a life should have been. They were chasing a ghost who had learned to hide inside normalcy. Interviews led nowhere. Employers praised his work ethic. Neighbors described routine kindness. Old acquaintances barely remembered him at all, which felt wrong in its own way. People are usually remembered for something: anger, joy, mistakes. This man left nothing behind. It was as if he passed through lives without ever touching them. The husband felt the shift before he saw it. He noticed unfamiliar cars driving slower than necessary, strangers asking careful questions, conversations that ended a second too soon when he entered a room. He didn't panic. Panic was dangerous. He had learned that long ago. Instead, he adjusted. He left home at the same time every day, returned at the same hour. He smiled more, spoke less, became even more ordinary than before. If lies were cracks, routine was cement. Calm was armor. He believed that if he remained unremarkable, the world would lose interest. But pressure doesn't need force to work. It tightens quietly. At night, sleep stopped coming easily. When it did, it broke apart without warning. He woke to the sound of his own breath, heart racing, mind replaying moments he had buried decades earlier, faces he had erased, a name he hadn't used in years. He stared into the dark, listening to the steady breathing beside him, wondering how close everything was to collapse. His wife felt the distance widen. The man she loved seemed farther away each day, sealed behind silence and irritation. Sometimes she wondered if there was another woman. An affair would have made sense. An affair could be explained. It would have hurt, but it would have fit the rules of betrayal she understood. What frightened her was the feeling that the truth was something worse. Arguments became frequent, not loud, not explosive, but heavy. Words hung in the air after being spoken. Questions went unanswered. When she pressed him, he accused her of mistrust. When she apologized, he withdrew further. Love became careful, conditional, quiet. Somewhere between shared dinners and sleepless nights, the marriage began to feel like a performance. Two people playing roles they no longer recognized. Meanwhile, the investigator couldn't let go. He carried the file home, read it again under dim light. The more he studied it, the more certain he became that this wasn't coincidence. Lives don't erase themselves by accident. People don't exist without leaving shadows. He requested deeper checks: old fingerprints, handwriting samples, cross-state records long forgot. He knew the answers wouldn't come quickly. Truth rarely does, but he also knew something else. If a man had spent a lifetime hiding, the smallest mistake could unravel everything. Back in the town, the husband stood at his porch one evening, waving as usual. His smile held. His posture was relaxed. To anyone watching, he was exactly the man he had always been. But inside, something trembled, because every unanswered question now carried weight. Every pause felt watched. Every knock at the door sounded louder than it should have. He had fooled everyone for so long that the idea of being seen, truly seen, felt unbearable. And somewhere, quietly, patiently, the truth was still asking. The end didn't come crashing through the door. It didn't shout his name or drag him away in handcuffs. It came quietly, almost gently, carried on the weight of a single mistake he never thought would matter. One letter sent too late, one connection left unfinished, one memory that refused to die. It began with an elderly man sitting alone at a kitchen table, hands trembling slightly as he held a newspaper clipping. The story was small, easy to miss, but the name, the voice described, the timeline. Something inside him stirred. A sound from decades ago echoed in his mind. A voice he had heard once in fear and never forgot. He called it in. When the FBI listened to the recording, the room went still. The witness spoke slowly, carefully, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might wake the past. He described a man he had encountered long ago. The way he spoke, the rhythm of his words, the calm tone masking something sharp beneath it. The agents exchanged glances. They had heard that voice before, just not under that name. The past, long buried, had found a way to breathe again. When agents arrived to speak with the husband, there were no raised voices, no sudden movements, just a quiet room and a single chair placed carefully across from him. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. He sat down slowly, hands folded neatly in his lap, back straight, eyes calm, the face of a man who had practiced stillness for a lifetime. They asked him simple questions at first. Where he had been, who he knew, what name he used years ago. He answered without hesitation, his voice steady, his expressions measured. He denied everything with the ease of someone reciting a familiar story. He had told these lies before, many times, to himself most of all, but denial has limits. The agents didn't argue, they didn't accuse, they waited. Then they placed documents on the table, one by one. Old fingerprints lifted from a forgotten surface. Handwriting samples matched across decades. Timelines that finally aligned when the truth was allowed in. Each piece landed softly, but the weight was crushing. The husband's jaw tightened, just slightly. His fingers pressed together harder than before. The calm began to fracture, not violently but visibly. Tiny cracks spreading across a face that had never expected to be examined this closely. In the corner of the room, his wife stood frozen. She had followed them there, still clinging to the hope that this was all a misunderstanding, that there was an explanation waiting just beyond the fear. But as she watched the evidence unfold, something inside her collapsed. The man she married, the life they built, the memories she trusted, they flickered like a film burning in a projector. She realized then that she might never have known him at all. Every story he told began to unravel under scrutiny. Details contradicted themselves. Names changed. Places shifted. Each correction exposed another lie beneath it. What once sounded confident now felt rehearsed, desperate. 72 years of deception narrowed into a single moment, silence. No denial followed, no anger, just a pause so long it felt endless. In that silence, the truth pressed forward, heavy and unavoidable, louder than any confession could have been. The husband stared at the table, not at the agents, not at his wife. For the first time, there was nowhere left to hide. No routine to retreat into, no smile to soften the moment. The mask, worn for decades, had finally slipped. The FBI didn't see a criminal mastermind sitting there. They saw exhaustion, a man drained by pretending, by remembering which name to answer to, which story to tell, which version of himself to perform. The weight of being invisible had finally become too heavy to carry. What shocked them most wasn't the crime that had started it all. Crimes they understood, motive, fear, desperation. What unsettled them was how easily he had blended in afterward, how he had lived among people who trusted him, ate at their tables, loved a woman who believed in him. Normalcy had been his greatest disguise, not brilliance, not cruelty, but being ordinary. He had waved at neighbors, paid his bills, shared quiet dinners, and in doing so he had erased suspicion entirely. Evil, they realized, doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks like a husband coming home on time. As the room emptied, his wife remained where she was. Her eyes searched his face for something familiar, anything real. But what she saw instead was a stranger finally being forced into the light. A man stripped of stories, left only with what he had done. He didn't look at her. That hurt more than anything else. Because in that moment, she understood the deepest betrayal wasn't the crime. It wasn't the lies. It was the years she spent loving someone who never truly existed. As agents prepared to take him away, the husband finally lifted his head. His eyes met theirs briefly. There was no plea in them, no fight, just resignation. The quiet acceptance of a man who had run out of places to hide. The illusion was gone, and what remained was a truth so heavy it bent everyone who stood near it. But the story wasn't finished yet, because once a mask slips, the cost of what was hidden has only just begun to reveal itself. Justice did not arrive with applause. It arrived quietly, carrying grief instead of relief. When the case finally closed, the town did not celebrate the truth. It sat with it, heavy and stunned, unsure what to do next. The streets looked the same. The houses stood where they always had. The porch where the husband once waved still faced the road. But everything felt altered, as if the town itself had aged overnight. People spoke softer. Doors closed sooner. Trust, once freely given, now hesitated. For the wife, there was no sense of closure. Only loss layered upon loss. She did not just lose a husband, she lost memories, she lost certainty. She lost the version of her life she had believed in for decades. Every shared moment now felt fragile, rewritten by doubt. She replayed conversations in her mind, searching for signs she had missed. The smiles, the silences, the nights she blamed herself for distance that had never been her fault. She wondered how love could survive when it had been built on a lie. Neighbors questioned themselves next. They remembered defending him, praising him, trusting him with their children, their homes, their stories. They asked how they could have been so wrong, how a man capable of such deception could live among them without suspicion. The answer was painful in its simplicity. He had been ordinary. Investigators felt the weight differently. They reviewed the case files again and again, aware of how close the truth had come to being lost forever. Decades had passed. Evidence had faded. Witnesses had grown old or disappeared entirely. One missed detail, one ignored question, and the man would have died peacefully, his secrets intact. The husband was no longer a mystery. He was a warning. He had spent his life hiding behind the safest disguises imaginable. Love, routine, familiarity. He understood that people look for monsters in the shadows, not at the dinner table. He proved that evil doesn't always shout or threaten. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it pours coffee and asks how your day was. Justice, when it came late. But it came. The FBI documented the case carefully, not as a triumph, but as a lesson. A reminder that even systems designed to uncover truth are vulnerable when lies wear human faces, when deception is patient, when it blends into daily life so completely that it feels wrong to question it. The agents involved carried the case with them long after it closed. They spoke of it quietly, often at the end of long days, not with pride but with humility, because they knew how easily it could have slipped away, how many years the truth had waited to be heard. The town tried to move on. Some families left. Others stayed, determined not to let one man define them. But trust, once broken, does not heal cleanly. It leaves scars. People learn to ask more questions, to listen more closely, to accept that discomfort is sometimes necessary. The wife eventually left the house they shared. The walls held too many echoes. She carried only what she needed and left the rest behind, unsure which memories were real and which were borrowed. She did not speak publicly. Her silence was her way of reclaiming something that had been taken from her. The husband spent his remaining days facing the truth he had avoided his entire life. No audience, no disguise, just time and memory. The man who had mastered invisibility was finally seen, and the weight of that exposure was heavier than any punishment. The moral of the story does not offer comfort. It offers responsibility. Evil does not need darkness to survive. It only needs acceptance. It survives when we stop questioning, when we choose peace over truth, when we assume familiarity equals safety. This story reminds us that truth is not always loud. It does not always arrive with certainty or clarity. Sometimes it waits quietly, asking small questions, hoping someone will listen. Because no lie, no matter how carefully lived, can outrun time forever. Time is patient. It watches. It remembers. It waits. And eventually, whether in a courtroom or a quiet room filled with silence, every mask slips. The question is not whether the truth will come out. The question is how much it will cost when it finally does.